If we want to make change happen, if we want to implement something that is going to ensure that a situation end up differently, then what is the most reliable, responsible, tactical, practical action that we can take today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and so on? Hello and welcome. This is the Astrology of the Week Ahead podcast. I'm your host and astrological bestie, Chani Nicholas. And in this episode, we are talking about the astrology of the week of November 11th, which is very loud and it's very disruptive. And it is talking about change. It is signaling something that is about change and also about innovation and updates, but in the most practical way possible. I really need us to understand this. It's not change once. It's not some big disruptive thing and then everything is different. I mean, maybe the astrology is talking about that. Maybe the astrology is reflecting that. But what I think it really wants us to look at and think about is that if we want a change in our own lives, and if we want to be part of making, let's say, a positive change in the world, if we want to disrupt something, if we want to stop something, if we want to interrupt something, then what can we do that is excessively practical to make our way towards that end goal? And by practical, I mean something we can do repeatedly, right? Because I can maybe jump off a cliff once, but I'm not going to do that every day. So in a way, part of this week's astrology is that big motion towards change, or that big kind of situation that is a one-off. And then another part of the astrology is telling us that, okay, maybe that thing is happening and that is something that is quite dynamic or eventful or really was very unpredictable. It was unforeseen. Fine. But what can we do to work with the moment? What can we do to facilitate the energy culmination of the moment towards a change that we most want to make? Again, it's a disruptive week. So I want us to think about, how do we work with disruptive moments so that they can benefit the things that we want to take hold and to take shape in the world. You might have guessed, this is a full moon week. This week is home to a very disruptive full moon in Taurus. Now, on one level, the moon loves to be in Taurus. That's just always true. And a full moon in Taurus can signify a moment that is really stabilizing. However, this full moon in Taurus is sitting right next to the planet of instability and of change and of disruption, Uranus. So we know that we have an excessively practical full moon on our hands because that's Taurus's deal. Taurus is like, okay, this is what I've got. How do I make it work in a steady, steadfast, reliable, practical way? How do I make this garden grow season after season after season, year after year after year? How do I build this thing into a gorgeous blossoming orchard? So that's the vibe of the full moon. But because it's sitting right next to Uranus, there's something here that's like, okay, well, I've got to change the way in which I do this. I need biodiversity. I need to be engaged in a really dynamic way with the resources at hand. And perhaps how we've been building something this whole time just doesn't work anymore. And so I need to be really innovative. I need to be experimental with the resources that I have. Again, in a practical kind of way. I keep harping on that word because the ruler of this full moon is Venus. Venus rules Taurus. So Venus is the planet we look to get more information about this particular full moon and its setup. So we know this full moon is disruptive. We know this full moon is somehow loud or shocking or bringing an event that is about change. Now, Venus is sitting in Capricorn. Venus moves into Capricorn on Monday. So we're already getting a week that begins with a shift in tone. As soon as Venus moves into Capricorn, the planet of love and beauty and connection and justice and social cohesion is making a square to the nodes. The nodes are where eclipses happen. So when a planet makes a conjunction, sitting next to, crosses over, or a square, that's a friction kind of aspect to the nodes, we know that something here is happening that's important to pay attention to, that has to do with the nature of the planet itself. So justice, relationship, women, femmes, LGBTQIA folks, and social cohesion in general, right? So people that represent Venus or the people that Venus represents, or the issues that Venus represents, which is justice, which is like, what are the scales of justice? How are they out of whack? How are they in place? Now, because Venus is also ruling the South Node, where we just had an eclipse on the 2nd of October, because Venus is ruling the South Node, there's something here that is really important to pay attention to about the justice that is not happening, or the loss of something that has to do with the scales and being in and out of balance in our collective experience, in our world, etc. So this week harkens back to the thing in a way that happens around the beginning of October, the end of September, beginning of October. Now, because it also rules this full moon, and within, 24 hours, it makes a square to the nodes, and this full moon is also so disruptive, it's a doubling up of information here that says this week is pivotal in terms of the dynamics that are going on in regards to justice, equality, women, femmes, and how we relate to each other. So on a personal level, big relationship stuff can come up this week. And then on a collective level, what are the stories about justice and injustice? What are the stories about women and gender equity situations, events, circumstances? What are we learning about what happens in the shadows? Because eclipses, the nodes is where eclipses happen, and they're about shadows. So Venus is triggering something about that, setting something off. So I think that this will be a week that does have big headlines about justice, the pursuit of it, women, femmes, gender equality, gender inequality, gender issues, if you will. I rolled my eyes for those of you that can't see me, those of you that are not watching this on film. Because there would be no need for gender equity if we lived within systems, obviously, that were at all equitable. So it's the system we want to focus on. How does the system strengthen the harm that gets inflicted on those marginalized by it? So as always, as I like to let you know, and people are like, why do you always say that? I think it's important. I am recording this in the past. I'm recording this in September of 2024. That's the year it is. And I like to say that because I want you to know I'm not commenting on the news that's happening in the moment because I don't know what it is. I can look ahead to see what this astrology looks like. And I can say like, okay, that looks disruptive. That looks like a situation. That looks like it's going to be an important moment for what is justice, what is getting disrupted. But I don't know the outcome of, say, last week and say any kind of elections or any kind of counting. But I do know this. Venus moves into Capricorn on Monday. It means business. It's excessively practical. It is wanting to get the job done. It is moving towards the goal, hopefully in a way that's like stylish and pleasurable and wonderful. But on Tuesday, Mercury, who is currently in Sagittarius and is in its pre-Mercury retrograde shadow phase, because it will station retrograde on the 25th of November, which is not that far away, 13 days away. So Mercury is in the zone where it will travel back to. Mercury is making a square to Saturn. Now, Mercury in Sag is not a good counter because Sag likes to go on a mythic quest. It doesn't really want to tell you all the specific dates or all the specific weight or all the specific details because it's more about the whole vibe of the tale. You know what I mean? It's mythic. It's not detailed. So if we need to count something when Mercury is in Sag, we better double, triple check, which is something that Tuesday says. Tuesday says, this detail is off, incorrect, go back to the beginning. So it does seem like something that we're counting or recounting or telling does get fact checked, or there's something here that is a stop. It's a no. Now, I go into this in great detail in your individual readings in the Chani app for premium subscribers, because it's a very important no for us personally. I want you to know where Sagittarius is in your chart, because this is going to happen 2 more times in December. And there's an important thing we need to curb in our life right now. This is not the time to take everything on in the part of your life that contains Sagittarius, the part of your chart that contains Sagittarius, and the part of your life that it is symbolizing. So it's good for us to strip it down now, because we know Mercury is about to station retrograde on November 25th and be retrograde for the first 2 weeks of December. So we're headed into a bit of a cluster F situation. So we don't want to overpromise or be over mythic in our tales. We want to stick to the data and the details. And it also says something, again, it's like we get sent to the principal's office, or we get a kind of like, no, that's not the right tally. I don't know who that's good for. I'm recording this in the past. I don't know who this is bad for. I'm recording this in the past. I'm just saying it looks like the numbers get stopped, or the data gets stopped, or there's something here that says no. Then on Thursday, Saturn, the planet of no and halting, stations direct. So that's a good situation. It's not a bad situation. It's not bad when Saturn's retrograde. It's a review. But when it's stationing direct, it's signaling something else can move forward. And the situation also gets very crystallized. So Saturn is about the structure. It is about what is correct. It is about critical information. It is about thinking critically. And it is about the shape and the form of something, usually the structures we live within. So Saturn is pulling focus here, which again, I do think is helpful in terms of getting things right. I just don't think that Mercury in its pre-retrograde detriment situation is good at getting things right that need to be detailed. So that's part of the setup. Then on Friday, the full moon happens. Big, loud, little chaotic, maybe big chaotic full moon, because it's sitting next to Uranus, the planet of, again, experimentation, out of the blue situations, big disruptive news headlines. For us personally, it's sitting in Taurus, a very fecund, very fertile, very lush sign. So it's about understanding what to do with the abundance of our life, with all that we've produced, and how to work with our resources in the most innovative ways. Okay, this is the landscape, this is the garden, this is the reaping that we've done. What do we do with the produce? What do we do with the product? What do we do with the tools that we have? How can we work them in a way that's going to be interesting, different, unique, and also necessary. We can't do things in the same way anymore. We've got to have a different type of plan or a different engagement with the practical stuff of our life, with the actual resources that we've got. And then on Saturday, Venus makes a square to those nodes. This is, again, on a personal level, big relationship material. Think back to what was happening at the end of September, beginning of October for you in terms of relationships, possibly. But also, on a collective level, this is something that is pivotal for the women in the news, for queer folks in the news, for issues about justice and injustice and the scales of justice. And again, what can we do that is incredibly practical to tip the scales of justice towards being more level? I was going to say in our favor, but that's not justice. But if things have been unjust, how do we bring the scales of justice back into center? That's one of the questions. And then on Saturday, the sun makes that exact opposition to Uranus. So it's just Friday, Saturday feel eventful, feel a little chaotic, feel like important breakthroughs happen. So I would take that on a personal level. Like maybe the world is in chaos right now. When isn't it? But on a personal level, there is something coming awake and alive through this full moon. And because it's a full moon, it might be a little overwhelming because generally they kind of are. But overwhelming can be fun. Overwhelming can be exactly what we need to really get the message or to really get the message across. I just think it's going to be really, really busy. This is also the last couple days of Pluto in Capricorn. Pluto will move into Aquarius next week for good, never in our lifetime to go back to Capricorn. Now, this is important because Mars is right now sitting in Leo. And next week, Pluto will move into Aquarius, which is the exact opposite sign. These two just made an opposition on November 3rd. Mars is in Cancer, Pluto is in Capricorn. Now they've moved slightly into new signs, but they're still in that tense opposition. And this is the thing that we need to understand, is that whatever started happening in October, whatever was happening in the beginning of November, we are in it until Q2 of next year. That's because Mars moved into its pre-retrograde shadow on October 5th, and it doesn't leave its post-retrograde shadow until May 3rd of 2025. So that's the time period that Mars is taking us through some kind of difficult situation because it's going to station retrograde on December 6th and be retrograde until about February 24th. So that is the really challenging part, all December pretty much, January, and most of February. But again, it's hanging around in the degrees that it was in until we get into May. So there's something from October to May that we're in. And because it's Mars, it's some kind of fight, or it's some kind of conflict, or it's some kind of battle. And it makes an opposition to Pluto on November 3rd, and it makes another opposition to Pluto at the very beginning of January. And then it makes another opposition to Pluto at the end of April. So again, because Pluto is changing signs and it's going to be in the sign opposite to Mars, we're pretty much just in the Mars opposition from about November 3rd until the end of April. So you can look at it from October to May or beginning of November to April. Either way, it's that section of time that we know is so important for world events because Pluto is about power and what happens on a subterranean level. And Mars is about a lot of things, one of them being about a fight or conflict. And because they're pitted against each other, or because they're in this relationship of tension and opposites and extremes, there's some kind of battle that we're in. Yeah, in our personal life, perhaps, probably a lot less. Like it won't feel so, it's not going to feel extreme like every day of those months. But on a collective level, that's tense. That's a situation that you want to like pay attention to. Like, what is happening? And because Mars is right now in Leo, it is about leaders and it is about leadership. So we are also working on this like Mars retrograde journey together, right? So I want you to know what area of your chart contains Leo. That is the area of your chart that Mars is really working right now, because it's going to station retrograde there at the beginning of December. So what you can do to figure out what is Chani talking about, go to chani.com or go to the Chani app and go under the weekly tab and scroll down and press the little button that says current sky horoscopes. Press on that and read your Mars in Leo horoscope. It will tell you what to look for, what area of your life to pay attention to, and how to approach this moment. If you don't have the Chani app, I mean, you should, but if you don't, fine. You can also go to chani.com and read your Mars in Leo horoscope for free. It's just up there. So you can just Google Chani Mars in Leo horoscope and it will come up. But take note of where Mars is right now, because as of next week, it's going to start to receive this tension, this application of pressure from Pluto. And it might make a situation that you thought was small big, or that you thought was big, you might reduce it down to something smaller, which could be the good thing, right? Like, how do we not get afraid of things that are just out of proportion? How do we shine the light on things to bring them into clarity? How do we not be afraid of what goes bump in the night because we're not going to see what it is? How can we gather our Mars, right? Mars is our courage and our valor. It's also our conflict and challenge. But it's like, okay, let me gather my courage and see what this really is. Let me not hide in fear from the things I need to be engaged in. How do I call up that leadership quality? It's Mars and Leo, so it's going to be about our own leadership. How do I call up that courage and look into the gutter, look into the depth of the underworld, which is Pluto, and say, I am not meant to be afraid of this, or I don't have to approach this with fear. Caution, yes. And, obviously be afraid of things that we should be afraid of, but like gravity and actual harm. But for the things that I can actually challenge and poke at and figure out a strategy, long-term strategy to work with, because Mars is going to station retrograde and take us on a big journey, and we're going to need a kind of long-term strategy for that. Mars is calling that up in us. It's like poking around. What kind of leader do you want to be in this moment? And if we are engaged in a kind of struggle, if we're engaged in this tension, or if we're on this teeter-totter for months, then how am I going to move through this with the greatest amount of agency? And I will say that in January, Mars will move back into Cancer. So it won't be in this tense aspect with Pluto forever. It will be out of sign. So it will be unable to see each other, but it's going to come back again in April. So again, nothing I say is like every single day, unless I'm just talking about one day. But with this Mars retrograde, there's different themes because it will change signs at the beginning of January, go back into Cancer, and that's a different kind of vibe. But for now, for the rest of November into December, and then again at the end of April, we've got this tension building, and we're in this really taut kind of moment, this feeling of like, whoa, I'm stretched, or this situation is incredibly tense. So how do we show up to it? Thank you so much for leaving us reviews in the App Store. It means the world to us. We read them. We are shaped by them. We listen to them. We take them in. And then also it helps other people that don't know about the app or the company to learn about it. It's the best gift you can give us. And we are just so grateful. I wanted to leave you with this one. It's called Best Astrology App. The amount of knowledge packed into this app is next level. Love weekly readings and the daily horoscopes. Worth the price. All right, y'all. Sending you lots of love, many, many, many blessings. I hope that we can work as practically as possible with whatever change is afoot, even if it's chaos, right? How can we show up to chaotic moments and be like, all right, what can I do here? What's the most practical thing to do in this moment? It's not getting lost in the chaos. I'll guarantee you that. It's showing up and being like, okay, I'm going to use this in a different way because it's a different situation. I'm going to use this tool in this way and this tool in this way, and I'm going to be experimental because I'm not going to get lost in any kind of like fear. I'm not going to get lost in the chaos. I'm going to be in the eye of the storm. And as always, this astrology might not land so dramatically for you. It's mostly not going to land dramatically for you. Right? Because it would be silly if we had these like big dramatic events all the time. So I'm really, especially in this podcast, talking about world events. So please don't take all of these things personally. Every now and then you'll be like, wow, that was really dramatic personally, but it's not going to be like that every week. So never, 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 never take this and be like, oh no, because that's not what it's meant for. But it is meant for this, like, okay, how do we work with the whirlwind that we're in as a collective at this moment in time on this earth? Like, you don't need an astrologer to tell you it's a pretty wild time. All right, I'll stop there. Come back next week. We'll talk about Pluto moving into Aquarius for good. And knowing this week, Pluto is at the nth degree of Capricorn, making a point to us all. And that point is, this part of our structure is rotten. This part of our structure doesn't work. This is like an old, outdated patriarchal norm, or settler colonialist, or all of the above, white supremacist, etc. Fill in the blank. This is what is crumbling about the structures that we live within, because that ultimately is Pluto in Capricorn. Remember that Pluto entered Capricorn in 2008 when we had the massive financial crises the world over, but especially in the United States. And this is the last moment of Pluto in Capricorn. So what is the bookend, right? If 2008 is one bookend, then the end of 2024 is the other. And what are they doing to rhyme with each other, these 2 years or these two kind of pockets of time? I'm sending you lots of love, many, 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 many blessings. May we innovate, may we update, may we be given the permission by ourselves to be experimental, especially practically. Bye for now.